What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new, my name's Cal and I'm an accounting student, but I'm interested in a lot of things like business and tech, philosophy, and just life in general, trying to live a considered life. So if you are interested in some of these things as well, I hope you join along. Today I want to share the most important skill that I've learned over the last couple years. It's really easy to learn, but it seems to fly under the radar. We're going to take a look at the power of asking a good question. And if you hang around to the end, we're going to get into how you can ask great questions. Next time you're in a conversation, I want you to run this little experiment. How many questions are you asking the other person? Is the conversation being driven primarily by statements? Are you asking any direct questions of the other person? Just do a little analysis of your next conversation. I'm curious what you come up with. I did this recently and I realized I would go an entire conversation, maybe 10 or 20 minutes even, and not ask a single direct question of the other person. Now, this isn't to say that conversation should be entirely question driven. I think that if you are going to be in a conversation that's completely question driven, it gets kind of to be like an interrogation, and you don't want that at all. You want there to be the natural ebb and flow. But there is a special power when you ask someone a direct question. It's giving them permission to answer candidly and honestly, and it's also showing that you're interested in what they have to think on the subject. All that said, I've just been astounded by how many conversations I get into and then fail to even ask 1, 2, or 3 decent questions to the other person to really kind of give them a platform to speak and share their mind a bit. But why ask questions? And why bother even engaging in that way? And perhaps most importantly, what's the effect of asking questions? In my experience, asking someone a question does 3 things. The first thing asking a question does is it gives the other person permission to share or speak their mind. Think of it like this. When someone asks my opinion on a subject or a life decision or something like that, I feel honored. I feel like they must consider me someone who has enough experience in this area or enough knowledge in this area to provide some valuable feedback. That is a very honoring sort of sensation that you get, and you feel very valued by that other person. Feeling that sense of value, I really think helps build strong relationships and helps build strong conversations and strong connections. Asking a question also shows that you care what the other person thinks. I feel like for all of the self-help books I've read or the personal development material I've gotten into, I don't see very many people talking about how being cared for or knowing that people care is sort of a fundamental human value. But when you ask a question of someone, what you're really saying is, I care about what you think. I care about what you feel. I care about what your take is on this particular subject. Think about a really challenging time in your life when you've needed to lean on someone, and knowing that that one singular person or maybe a couple close friends or family care enough to support you through this season, that is enough to get you through. That's enough to keep you persevering through that challenging time, which is kind of why it's so important to ask questions on a more human level, on a more like psychological level, to demonstrate to the people that we're talking with that we care. We care in this small moment about what you have to say, what you think. So even asking a small question like, how are you, demonstrates that there is a level of care there that you are trying to express. And it's fundamental in all human interactions. And finally, when you ask a question, it gives you more opportunities to listen. I think when I ask questions, there's a better chance that the entire conversation doesn't revolve around me. When you ask those questions, it's giving you more opportunities to hear the other person's response. And when you're hearing their responses, you are actively engaging and listening to them, hopefully. And so that you can ask thoughtful questions in return to understand them more, to demonstrate that you care, to really know where they're coming from. And if you really want to ask fantastic questions, you have to lean into the conversation. And in order to lean into the conversation, you need to be listening and you need to be engaged. I would also add here as one more item, asking questions can open doors that you never even knew existed. It might sound cliche, but I think there's a lot of truth in this statement when people say, you don't have things because you don't ask, or something along those lines. There are so many opportunities that unless you put yourself out there, they will never come to fruition. There's kind of this falsity or falsehood or this lie that we tell ourselves that we are gonna wait until someone asks us. We're gonna wait until we're noticed. We're gonna wait until we are seen in order to pursue that dream or that goal or that new skill set we wanna add. But in reality, the power is in our hands. And most likely, for most of us, there isn't gonna be someone who is asking us to step up to the plate, who's gonna recognize what we think we see in ourselves. We have to demonstrate to the world what's inside of us for people to see the value that we deep down know that we can bring. I think there's so much more to say on that topic, and maybe we'll tackle that in another video, but just remember, asking questions can open doors that you don't even realize are there. My focus on questions definitely has some deep roots, so just buckle in for story time. When I was young, on our way to any function or family event, my mom would always say, hey guys, think of 3 questions you can ask people when we arrive at this event. As a kid, it's kind of one of those things that you roll your eyes at, but looking back, that reminder she gave us placed so much value for us on asking questions of other people and taught us how to properly engage with others. To this day, I credit that story, which happened many, many times over my childhood, to sort of my desire or awareness to ask good questions of people when I see them. If you're looking for a takeaway from this video, I would highly recommend curating 2 to 3 questions before you go to any sort of dinner or meetup or hang out even with friends. So let's get into some of the details of how you ask good questions. In my experience, there have been a few helpful tactics that I've tried. The first thing I'd say is know your context. If you're with a group of close friends, the questions that you ask are going to be a lot different than the questions that you might ask on a first date. Those are 2 completely different contexts, and the way that you ask questions and the questions that you ask are going to look different. In general, I would put a warning out there from putting too much emphasis on questions, because in neither situation do you want this to be an interrogation. With the close friends, you know these people better, so you might be asking more personal questions. But on the first date, you might just be asking questions that kind of get at their interests, and you're trying to develop a framework of who this person is. So you're asking things that are more general. If the date goes really well, maybe you go deeper, but especially in the beginning, you're just gonna ask things that are slightly more open-ended. The second tip I would give when trying to ask better questions is ask follow-up questions. Follow-up questions are kind of the secret sauce of question asking, in my opinion. For one, they're just a natural part of the conversation. Harvard Business Review actually did a great sort of deep dive on how to ask better questions, and they talk about this a little bit, which I'll link the article down below so you can read more if you're interested. But essentially, follow-up questions are a natural part of a conversation, and you can just ask something like, oh, tell me more about what you just said, or what do you think about X, Y, or Z, which is sort of riffing on what they said previously. Follow-up questions are just a continuation of the conversation, but they show that you're interested and engaged, and they allow the conversation to flow really nicely. My final tip for asking better questions has to do with asking why. Now, a lot of people have written on this topic. Simon Sinek has a massively popular book on the question of why, and the question of why dates back to like Socrates, essentially. In my opinion, the reason why this question is so effective is because asking why requires us to be reflective. If you've ever been in a conversation and you find yourself just talking or maybe throwing out opinions, and then someone asks you why, you're kind of stopped dead in your tracks. And all of a sudden you have to back up what you just said. When someone asks me, oh, why do you think that? It really makes me stop and think, because now I have to be accountable for what I just said. I would also say that you don't want an entire question just built off whys. If you do that, I do think you run the risk of coming off as quite aggressive. Constantly asking why is not a particularly pleasant way to speak to someone. That being said, asking why can really take conversations to a new level when you ask someone why and they are really forced to consider why they believe something or why they're going about something the way that they are. If you're still watching at this point, thank you. But also on a more considered note, we are constantly inundated with information in our current era. From text to tweets to Instagram to even YouTube to all forms of media, podcasts, we have more information available at our fingertips, and we're doing more communication than we've ever done before. There are some crazy stats out there on the number of texts sent per minute or emails sent per hour, but so much of this communication is purely functional. We are asking questions in order to get answers. We are making queries in order to satisfy the data. It's this back and forth, it's this give and take. And yet, in the midst of all this, we're never really scratching the surface of what someone else might be experiencing. So I hope that this video prompts you to ask questions of the people in your life who maybe you're living with side by side, and you see them every day, but you haven't asked them those deep questions yet. Or maybe there's questions that you want to ask them, but you haven't quite worked up the courage to do so. Or maybe it's just more of a friendly check-in, a how are you sort of question. My hope is for myself and for others that asking these questions leads us to a greater understanding of the people that we love the most in our lives and the people who are closest to us. It is amazing how we can live side by side with people, and yet we never truly check in with them. So I hope that through this video, you find yourself asking more considered questions to your closest family and friends. All right, friends, thank you so much for watching. That does it for this video, and I will see you in the next one.